We're going to go ahead and start the meeting. Can we get a roll call, please?
Okay, Dr. Beebe?
Here.
Dr. Beebe is present. Ms. Bofi?
Here.
Ms. Bofi is present. Ms. Bradford?
Here.
Ms. Bradford is present. Mr. Garvey?
Here.
Mr. Garvey is present. Mr. Gio? Mr. Gio is absent. Ms. Hill?
Present.
Mr. Hill is present. Mr. Lee? Dr. Moranti?
Present.
Dr. Moranti is present. Ms. Orange-Jones?
Present.
Ms. Orange-Jones is present. Mr. Romer?
Here.
Mr. Romer is present. Ms. Smith? Ms. Smith is not present. You have a quorum.
Okay, we have a request for personal privilege.
Yes.
For Ms. Hill. Would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to take this time to recognize a young lady that's here with me today. One of the things that I do believe in, to whom much is given, much is required, and we must give back. So today I have a young lady here with me who is shadowing me, and she's an 11th grade student, and she's trying to identify what her career goals will be in the near future. So I'd like to introduce her. Ms. Victoria Torrey Turner is a student at International High School of New Orleans. She's an 11th grader and is enrolled in the International Baccalaureate Diploma Program. Her goal is to be a voice for all students and to ensure that BESE create policies that are effective for all students and educators. So I'd like to please give a round of applause to Ms. Torrey Turner for being here this morning. And I asked her that would she like to say anything, so if you have anything to say, you're more than welcome.
First, I'd like to say thank you to Ms. Carolyn Hill for giving me the opportunity to be here. I'm very honored to be in the behind the scenes and looking at how Louisiana's policies are formed as a high school student in the system. It's very nice to see the people who are creating your rules and your policies, that your teachers come back and tell you this is what we're going to have to do now. I'm like, well, why? Who came up with that? It's now a first-hand look, and our principal is here as well. I want to say thank you to him for the support of me being here and allowing this to be part of my CAS project in school. So overall, thank you, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Can we have the next agenda item?
Your consent agenda is ready for approval, adding items 2.3 and 2.4.
Okay, can I get a motion for that? So moved. Ms. Bradford, second Mr. Romer. Do we have any objections to the motion? Any questions? Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Next item.
First item is item 2.1 on page 1, consideration of a memorandum of understanding with Innovators in Milestones for the 2014-15 school year. The department recommendation is to approve.
Can we get a motion to that effect? Ms. Bradford, second. Ms. Orange-Jones.
Yep.
Do we have any speakers? We do have a speaker. Do we have any questions from BESE members? Ms. Beebe?
Yes, sir. In the supporting documentation, if I recall, and of course I remember the group coming before us, I think at the October meeting. So the recommendation is to approve with conditions. Is that correct, Superintendent White?
Yes. So members, let me give you an update on this in the time since we've last met. First, you'll recall that this is a school that is a Type 2 charter school located in Jefferson Parish. In the time over the last year, the school has lost its management organization. It did not have a principal, and it did not have a building. In the time since then, we have adjusted the charter so as to require that, or to not require they have a management organization. They have found a principal, but they do not have a permanent home. And this, you'll recall, was the issue that we faced last time. The recommendation in front of you is what I think is the most practical space to be at this time, which is the school does not have yet a building. However, they have made positive traction toward getting a building. And so the board and we are in a little bit of an awkward position because we're left waiting for this school to get a building. All the while, kids are beginning to enroll in school for next year, and they need to consider when that building is done. The recommendation you see in front of you is one whereby Milestone, the charter board, would be directed to seek a material amendment to their charter to finalize the location of their building no later than the March meeting of this board. If they were unable to seek that material amendment by that time, meaning unable to declare that they have a facility for next school year by that time, the board, per this recommendation, would begin the process of revoking the contract. However, this gives them until March to seek the material amendment and to finalize, therefore, their location for next year. Now, that obviously is not on the timeline that we would have liked, but I do commend the board for moving in a positive direction and getting closer to finality. I think this is the most practical recommendation, given the need to inform parents of where their school is going to be in a reasonable timeline, and at the same time, the need to give this board ample time to locate a facility. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair.
Okay, Ms. Hill first, and then Ms. Bradford.
I just have two questions. One would be, I guess, I don't know if someone is here from the school that can answer this question. What has been the academic status for the past 4 years of this school in regards to their achievements?
What do you mean academic status?
In regards to if they're A, B, C, D, F?
They are a D. They are a D.
Okay, and what has, for the past 4 years, they've been consistent with being a D school?
Yes.
Okay. After reading...
That is, but just so we're clear, that issue has already been resolved by the board, and that you approved their reauthorization. In other words, they were given a contract because they met the renewal standards. I think we've been clear that we don't think the academic performance of the school is where it should be. But that is not the issue in front of the board.
Okay.
The issue in front of the board is an operations issue, which is that this school has yet to have a facility.
Right.
And at some point, the board needs to make a decision, can you sustain a contract with a school that doesn't have a facility? Now, they have said, understandably, that it takes time to get a facility, and I am now proposing that we have a final resolution where you say, okay, you have until March to seek an amendment to your charter to name the date, the place of the building. If you don't have it by March, we need to end the contract.
And I guess my last question would be, after reading over the information that was presented to us in the packet, the inconsistency in regards to a location, and I guess my concern would be, as I'm not a parent, but as a board member, here is a school that we've been struggling with trying to identify a location for their students, and this is not something that has been going on just now. They've been having some challenges, and I guess my concern is, how do we move forward for our students, and if this is a right approach for our students, because you made the statement that now students are being enrolled into schools for the upcoming school year.
Well, I think you're voicing the same concern that I've had, Ms. Hill. That's the
Okay.
exact same concern I've had. It's the one I expressed at the last meeting, and you asked me to go work with the board of this charter school. We've done that, and we're now bringing you what we think is a practical proposal, which is that they've made progress. I believe our last presentation achieved what it was meant to achieve, which is that the board has sought a space. They are in negotiations with the Archdiocese of New Orleans for that space, but they've not finalized it. And so we don't want to cast aspersions on them, but on the other hand, we have to be reasonable. And I'm suggesting to you that at the March meeting, if that is the deadline by which they would seek a material amendment to their charter to identify the location of their school, if they can't do it by then we would begin revoking the contract.
So would it impact them, because according to the documentation, it says the first round of the enrollment system ends on February the 27th, and we're asking them to have a contract by March 5th. So how would that impact their enrollment in regards to, are they going to have to go through the second round?
It
or
really
students
depends
will-
how quickly we can get it done. The quicker we can get it done, the more easily we can change the information in the enrollment system. You know, across 100 schools, actually it's more like 200 in New Orleans, you're always going to have some changes that require that we put an insert into the guide for parents. As soon as we get a final piece of information, there will be an insert put in. No one is more aware of the challenges of not having this building finalized than I am. That's why I'm the one who's continued to ask that this be on the agenda. I'm bringing you what I think is the most practical solution possible.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Bradford.
My question is kind of along that same lines, Superintendent. At what point will we begin or have a contingency plan for these students so that if the worst case scenario happens and we get to March without a place for this school to have for their building, when will we know, will we have something in place at that time to say, here's where your children will go?
Yes, there are two parishes in question. One is Orleans Parish and one is Jefferson Parish. The majority of the kids are from Orleans. There are some kids from Jefferson. We're in coordination with the Jefferson Parish Public Schools, who are aware of the situation because these kids are in currently a Jefferson Parish school building. They will enroll students in Jefferson Parish and are ready to do so in their zone school or a school of choice. In Orleans Parish, we would enter the kids into the second round of 1-app as soon as we know, and they'd have the same choice that other kids in Orleans have.
Okay, any other questions? Any objections to the motion? The motion carries. Next item.
Next item is on page 2, item 2.2, consideration of the 2015 Common Charter application, 2015 request for applications timeline for types 2, 4, and 5 charter schools, and the 2015 local district charter application timeline. The department recommendation is to approve.
Okay, we have a motion to that effect. Ms. Bradford, second Ms. Bofi. Do we have any questions from BESE members? Ms. Beebe? Can we start with the superintendent, please?
Would you mind, Dr. Beebe, if I just introduce the item? Thank you very much. This is an annual process that you approve the charter application. So this is just literally the form by which a charter organization and nonprofit board seeks to apply. You're not approving a school. You're not making any decisions about applicants. You're just approving the actual application form. There are some changes that we're making, although I would call them tweaks. We have changed some wording around capacity to call it readiness instead. We have elevated the importance of principles by requiring that the entire application come with a holistic assessment of the principal's actual capacities. But these are tweaks to the overall application. These are not significant changes. You are being asked to approve this as you are every year.
Okay, Ms. Beebe?
Well, I was just curious, the role of the school works, that is the independent charter authorizer. Am I correct, Superintendent?
It's not an authorizer, it's just an independent reviewer.
Reviewer.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the role of school works is to accept proposals, then offer recommendations to the entity submitting for
Correct.
consideration.
That's right. The law requires there just be an independent review.
Just an independent review.
Yes.
And what is I know we approve, but I know at one time there was an independent, is it one and the same, the independent, forget, what was the name of that?
NACSA?
The National Association of Charter School Authorizers.
So they're equivalent to that group?
Yes, correct. Correct.
Okay, do we have any other questions?
I have a comment. I
Mr. Romer?
support this motion, but one thing I would want to consider, not now because it deserves a longer discussion. One of the frustrations in the process, I think we've done a better job of giving applicants a chance to address shortcomings in their application. One of my frustrations I'd like you, Superintendent, to think about and perhaps come back to us with a recommendation. You may conclude there should not be. It ends up at the final time when we make the approval, it often on 2 or 3 occasions becomes kind of a he said, she said presentation where, an applicant was told that they were insufficient in a certain area. The applicant claims that they responded appropriately and showed that they weren't insufficient, but there never seemed to be a conclusion on the issue. And maybe I'm wrong on that, but I'd like you to consider, again, because it won't affect this timeline right now, this timeline's fine, is there a place in this process for a representative of this board to participate in that portion of the review of when there's been an insufficiency identified by SchoolWorks. Should a board member, or should SchoolWorks, maybe the better answer is that a representative of SchoolWorks be required to be here to address that insufficiency with his board. I just feel like it's a missing component. We don't really get feedback from the reviewer about the response in a sufficient manner, in my opinion. And again, I don't want to change this. I want this to remain the same, but I'd like us to consider, is there another way to improve the process? And I'm not certain.
Well, I think that you've encouraged us, first of all, I agree with you. You as a board have encouraged us to have more dialogue, and I think it's become, and this is a credit to David Shepard on our staff, I think it's become a very organic dialogue. And so it's, applicants feel acceptable. It's okay just to pick up the phone and call David. It's not a big formal process. So I think when we say, well, look, we told you that, it could have just been in a conversation at some point. Sure. Maybe we need to formalize the receipt of some feedback more than we have in the past. There are other processes where organizations will require someone to certify they've received given feedback. Maybe that should be the way it is.
And I don't want it to become too bureaucratic, but that I'd like you to consider: is there something to do there? That's
so,
all.
Lauren and David, why don't we consider this? I'd like to report back to the board at the next meeting. I think, the board sees the most tense and contentious aspects of these dialogues that actually are very substantive and in my experience, for the most part, quite friendly and collegial. There might be a way, Lauren, of us representing to the board that we did this in a way that was in the spirit of fairness, maybe more than just us saying we did. So we will, Bridget, maybe try to get that on the next agenda item, next agenda. Thank you.
Okay, we have a speaker on this, Ms. Lee Barrios.
Lee Barrios, retired teacher from St. Tammany. I just wanted to address two problems that I saw with the commentary that the department offered in this agenda item. One is speaking to the accuracy of it, and one to the appropriateness of it. Once again, Superintendent White insists on presenting research that's failed to gain credibility, and in such a way as to promote a false perspective of charter schools. Worse yet, he continues to use it to malign the successes of traditional public schools. So I'll speak to the accuracy next, but I wonder, is it appropriate if the tables were turned in this department, this board, supported traditional schools over charters, would it be appropriate to include research that showed that traditional schools did a better job than charter schools? The Center for Research of Education Outcomes, CREDO, yes.
Let me ask you, I think that you might be addressing an issue in another item.
I don't think so.
This is just a timeline on...
Right, but if you look at the commentary that was offered to you all, right there on the agenda item, that's what I'm speaking to. And I'm going to quote part of it in just a second.
Okay, thank you.
Center for Research on Education Outcomes, known as CREDO, released a national study of charter schools, results of which suggest that less than 1/100th of 1% of the variation in test performance, and again, there's only one measure that they address, test performance, in reading is explainable by charter school enrollment. Yet, based on this, CREDO issued a press release stating that, quote, charter school students now have greater learning gains in reading than their peers in traditional public schools. This conclusion was repeated in newspapers across the nation and by our superintendent. Superintendent White repeats the inaccurate and highly inflated claims of the CREDO report when he said in this agenda item, last year Stanford University reported that the typical student in a Louisiana charter school gains the equivalent of 2 additional months of learning in reading and 3 additional months in math per year in comparison to peers with similar demographics in traditional public schools. The CREDO study White continues to promote not only misrepresents the facts, but it was based on highly questionable data that Superintendent White has refused to share with other reputable research organizations. His continual lack of transparency resulted in a lawsuit and an appeal filed by Research and Reforms. NEPC was not, the National Educational Policy Center out of Colorado, was not among those who argued that the original CREDO findings proved charters were doing meaningfully worse than publics, which some did. Instead, the review and the press release place the Credo study within the larger body of research and summarize the findings as follows. Quote, the primary findings of the Credo report show that charter school students' test performance is basically the same as the performance of students enrolled in traditional public schools. The actual finding is that charter is at 17%, had better results than the comparison student results attributed to conventional public schools, while 37% did worse. Notwithstanding the 17%, 37% figures, the study, if read properly, did not show much separation between the sectors. So I just wanted to make that correction and wonder how appropriate it is for this board to be pushing charters over traditional schools. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any other questions from BESE members? Hearing none, do we have any objections to the motion? Hearing none, motion carries. Next item.
Next item is item 2.5 on page 17. Consideration of the extension of charter contracts for BESE authorized charter schools based on third-year reviews, and consideration of the renewal of charter contracts for BESE authorized charter schools currently operating in the last year of the current term. The department recommendation is to approve.
Okay. Can we get a motion to that effect?
Well.
Ms. Moranti? Mr. Romer, second?
And I have some further, I'm glad to make the motion to get the ball rolling here, so I'll make that motion.
Very good. And then you'd like to speak?
Then I'd like to
Go ahead.
And members, bear with me. There are a number of approvals here for us to consider. There are a few in particular that I think deserve some extra attention, and I've been asked by Mr. Dobard to bring those up so that he can articulate. Is Superintendent Dobard here? I don't have my glasses on. I can't
He was.
see. Okay. And so if I can, I'll bring those up and ask Superintendent Dobard to articulate a little bit more the nuances of these particular renewals, and then it may require us to consider a different motion than simply the motion that's on the floor right at this moment. But I want to give board members a chance to hear Superintendent Dobard's report and ask questions as they may feel appropriate. The two schools in particular, I believe, have a nuance with their renewal. One is KIPP New Orleans Leadership Academy. The second is Martin Luther King Jr. And I believe those are the two that you wanted to bring some issues to our attention and perhaps have us consider an additional motion for the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Roman and committee members. I'm Patrick Dobard, Superintendent, Louisiana Recovery School District. And so what we wanted to address is just a couple of the renewals that we have in the packet, and I'll speak to it. The first one would be for KIPP New Orleans Leadership Academy. The school did meet the bar for renewal, but the bar that they met was, and to their acknowledgement and ours as well, it was just barely meeting that standard, and we have a very high standard. All of the other KIPP schools are doing extremely well, and there was some just challenges around this. And so in talking with the KIPP leadership, they've agreed to implement a rigorous plan to improve the staffing, which they've already done, professional development, as well as academic monitoring, ensure that they have a continuous academic improvement at the school. I mean, we've met and went into great detail with them, and there's strong assurances that they've turned this around, and the school will get back on the trajectory that it had been in the past. And so what we want to do for this particular renewal, we want to have an addendum that details this plan, so we have it in writing, and that KIPP has already committed verbally to signing the addendum prior to the January BESE meeting and have been very cooperative in this full process. And so we want to make certain that that is just an addendum that's added to it. And we have all assurances. So we want to move for renewal, but also when we move forward with their contract, that this will be a part of that.
So members, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Just to highlight where Mr. Dobard is in terms, if you want to look at it in your materials, it's on page 19 under the Type 5 Charter Renewals. About halfway down, you see KIPP New Orleans Leadership Academy. It is recommended for renewal, as he said. They did meet the bar, but I think, and Superintendent, let me paraphrase, and you correct me, that they barely met it and have agreed to some additional rigor within their contract so that they may exceed the bar, hopefully, much greater extent than they did. Is that
Absolutely, for as close as it was, and they just wanted, as an organization, and also in just working with our team and Superintendent White, we accepted their offer to say, it's not acceptable to them to be so close on the line, as well as for us to have an assurance that when they come up for the next renewal, that they will be far ahead of where they are now. And they have shown that. There just were some challenges that all schools face around leadership, but I think their proactivity, and they're able to articulate it very clearly in the document, and having it added as an addendum to their contract speaks to their commitment and their belief in that they're going to continue to move forward in a very positive manner with this school and their other schools.
And the addendum has to do actually with academic performance and professional development, and they're willing to put
Yes,
that within
and
there?
leadership development, absolutely.
Mr. Chair?
Yes,
and
sir.
Of course, board members may have a question. I'd like to move on this as a separate item, the KIP renewal, so that, and board members, let me get this, if I may get this motion out, then board members may have a question, but I'd like to move that we approve the renewal of the KIP Academy based on the addendum regarding academic performance and professional development be included in the renewal charter contract, and that renewal should be completed no later than the January 2015 BESE meeting with the appropriate language in it. That'd be my motion.
Okay, I'll take that as a substitute motion, and we can come back and get the original motion after we dispense with this one, and we have a second by Ms. Moranti.
I have a question.
Ms. Hill?
Maybe Ms. Shan, you can direct me in my response. My concern is we're voting for these schools, and I understand Mr. Romer's concern as well. But I wanted to make a motion. I don't know if this is the appropriate time, or should we go ahead and vote on Mr. Romer's motion to actually pull or vote separately on all charters that are in F status.
I
what
believe
would be
that
the appropriate way to
Mr. Romer's motion does not conflict with yours, so why don't we dispense with Mr. Romer's motion, then we can come to yours.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. Any other questions from BESE members? Hearing none, do we have speakers on this item?
But it's not relevant to this piece.
Okay, let's hold off on those. We'll come back to those in just a minute. Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have any objections to the motion? Hearing none, that motion carries. Now we go to Ms. Hill.
I believe
Go ahead, one more.
there was two schools that I asked him to comment on. That was one. And if I may,
You would like to address a second
I'd like to have
school
the
independently?
address the second one, and
Okay.
then we can decide if we want to dispense with it or not.
Why don't we go ahead and do that, because again, that does not conflict with Ms. Hill's intended motion. So, Mr. Romer.
Yes.
And so the second one that Mr. Rama asked me to speak to is for Martin Luther King Charter School. And so we have an addendum also for this particular school that we would like the board, Mr. Rama would like the board to consider. And basically, in this addendum, we want to have added to their contract as a condition for renewal that there's clarity and just a confirmation of the understanding and application of enrollment policies in New Orleans with our central enrollment system. And so this is something that all schools ought to follow regardless. But what we found recently, that this school has received a number of parental complaints around enrollment. In fact, we've received this year more complaints from this one school than we have for all other schools. So we have about 9 total complaints just this year alone. And one of the things we've been trying, our team and their team, we've been trying to work together to work through that. But one of the things is that, their enrollment at the school is like it's less than 2% of the system, but about 15% of the complaints this year. And we have every confidence that our enrollment policies are very clear. We also know that there were some instances, and one that was serious enough, where we've just recently sent a letter of a notice of breach, and just saying that, and with a notice of breach, you have the opportunity to correct it, so it's not a negative reflection in your contracting. but you have to reconcile and rectify the situation with the notice of breach. And we've had other schools that receive notices of breaches that have responded to them in a timely fashion. And if a school doesn't follow the steps outlined in the notice of breach, then there could be some other steps that would take forward that would have negative consequences for the school. But in this particular case, what we're looking to have happen is that we want to make certain that it's very clear going forward with their renewal, the understanding and the administration and the following of the enrollment procedures. And with that, we want to continue to work very closely with them. We're pleased with all of our operators that serve our children, but the enrollment part of our system is the most serious thing that we have as government in ensuring that our students are served equitably. So we don't take this lightly, and the seriousness of it warrants us to make certain that going forward in any renewal, that it is an acknowledgement of the policies and that there's a full understanding of the enrollment policies. So with that, we're asking the board to defer consideration because they still need time to respond to the notice of breach. And so we would ask that MLK's renewal until the January BESE meeting to make sure that all of these things are remedied and before we agree to the renewal of another 5 years. So we feel like it can be and will be rectified, but they'll need time to continue to work through this notice of breach. And so I'm happy to answer any questions, Mr. Romer or Mr. Chairman, on it.
Can I make a motion to that effect?
That's fine with me.
Okay. Ms. Bradford makes a motion to that effect.
Postpone MLK till January meeting.
Okay. Ms.
I'll
Romer, would you like to second that?
I'll second that.
Okay. Do we have any questions from BESE members? Okay. Hearing none, that motion carries. Mr. Romer, do you have any more surprises?
None yet.
Okay. But you reserve your right.
I reserve my right to have a
Figured.
surprise. No,
Okay. Ms. Hill.
Yes, I'd like to make a motion to vote separately on all of the renewals that the schools are currently in F status for the 3-year renewal, or D, because that's not passing. And I guess my concern would be is that when we're approving these charters, and when we look at the traditional public setting, and when we look at the scholarship setting, if a school is not meeting the benchmarks, whether they meet the benchmarks or not, we still hold them accountable. And so majority of these schools have been in the system for years. And so my concern is to continue to renew schools that are in failing status and continue to have our children trapped in failing schools and not having nowhere to go. I would like to vote separately because there are some charters that's within this packet that are good charters and that are doing a great job. So, and I don't want to hinder those charters in regards to my vote. So I'd like to pull all of the schools that have, I would like to make a motion to pull all of the schools that are currently in DNF status for the 3-year renewal and vote separately in regards to those who are A and B, C charters.
Okay. And we have a second by Ms. Beebe. Superintendent, did you
I do.
want to comment?
Thank you. We got the discussion off to a fast start with the KIPP and the King issues. Let me just provide some framing overall, because I want to make a couple of adjustments to things that Ms. Hill said. You have a group of schools in front of you that are up for extension or renewal. And I think it's important that we talk about the difference between those two things. An extension is a checkpoint. After typically 3 years, you get to give a little check just to make sure that you don't want to make a drastic action. But there are no rules regarding which schools are granted extensions and which are not. The schools that Ms. Hill, in other words, it's at the department's discretion and at your discretion to decide who gets an extension. The schools that Ms. Hill is referring to are getting an extension. This has nothing to do with whether you're renewing their contract. This is an extension. Now, there are other schools that are up for a renewal, meaning you have to tell us to rewrite their contract. There are very strict rules in the law governing which schools get a recommendation for renewal and which do not. So I say that just to give you an instruction that from a renewal perspective, everything that's in front of you is per the law, very strict rules. From an extension perspective, this is the department's discretion in recommending whether or not someone should be able to continue to operate just for another year until their renewal decision next year. The ones that Ms. Hill has pulled, and I'm happy to have the discussion that she raises, because I think it's an important discussion, but are for an extension. It's not for renewal of the contract. It's just deciding, should we give them another year until their renewal is done?
Just to correct you, Superintendent White, which is incorrect. I understand the difference between an extension and a renewal. My motion was all of the schools that are up for renewal that has a 3-year renewal term, I would like to pull those schools and vote separately for them, because there are some charters.
I'm not objecting to any of that.
Okay.
I think you're
Now,
I
those
agree with
who
what
are
you're
for
doing.
extension, that's fine. I'm
Yeah.
not worried about them.
Okay.
I'm worried about the ones that are up for renewal.
Okay, so just so we're clear,
Okay.
which ones are you referring to?
There are 8. You have the Max Charter School, which is a Type 2 charter school. You have Algiers Technology Academy. You have Dwight Elementary School. You have Gentilly Terrace Elementary School. You have KIPP New Orleans Leadership Academy. You have KIPP Renaissance High School. You have Renew Culture Art Academy. You have William College Prep School. Those are the schools that I'm making.
Okay, got it. Okay, my mistake. I did not understand where you were headed, and I appreciate you raising it.
Okay, did the staff capture those?
You want to take care of the extensions and then move on to the...
Let's go ahead and do this item. Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have any further questions and comments from BESE members? Do we have any?
Is this Ms. Hill's motion?
So,
Yes.
I want to make sure I understand Ms. Hill's motion. She wants to pull the renewals
Yes.
that are 3 years? Is that what, is
And
that
vote
what you said?
separately.
Yes.
Because I feel that there are some charters that are doing a great job, and they shouldn't be penalized in someone's vote because of all these others that are lumped together. That's all.
And all that I would say to the board before we do that is that there are strict rules in BESE regulations regarding which schools can be brought for a renewal recommendation and which can't. Any school you see here that's being recommended for renewal, it's because the terms of the law have been met. If there's a recommendation for no renewal, it's because the terms of the law have not been met. You are not considering today any decision to not renew a school, meaning every one of the recommendations you're receiving on a renewal, the school has met the bar that are in the regulations that BESE has passed.
Excellent.
Well, then I object to the motion.
Well, I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Okay. We have Mr. Romer's comments. Ms. Beebe?
So Superintendent White, you're saying that these schools that they earned Fs and there is a recommendation for renewal and they met the law? Is
Unless
that
my
what I-
staff can help me understand where the discrepancy is coming, I don't.
We're
this
being
is-
asked to
no, no,
approve renewals,
Dr.
am I
Beebe, if I could
correct?
finish. I believe that schools that have an F letter grade and are being recommended for your approval are being recommended for extension, not for renewal.
But it says renewal.
Okay, just so
Why
my
didn't it
staff
say
can maybe help
extension?
me understand what the issue is.
And while they're getting their thoughts together, you know, we have indicted local school systems, and I've heard board members say repeatedly that failure is not an option.
Okay,
and that
Dr.
we-
Beebe, with respect, no one is suggesting that it is. We're going to make sure we explain what the situation is with the paperwork, and then we will go from there. But everything that's in front of you is per the law. It's just a numeric calculation, and that's what the recommendations are based on. So this is Patrick Walsh from the department.
Good morning,
Mr.
Patrick
Walsh?
There are no schools up for renewal this December that have a letter grade of F. There are 2 schools that are up for extension this December. Those schools are Renew Accelerated number 1 and number 2.
And that
So-
that was my objection. I don't believe any of the renewals listed are in fact an F.
Well, I'm just looking at what it says here. It
Okay,
says
so
max-
why don't we explain?
Okay,
Why don't we
go ahead.
work that through? Can you
Could you
direct
point
us
me
to
to
which
where
page
you're-
you're looking
Okay,
at?
let's use, for example, since we're going to, the Max
page are you on?
Charter School, it says a 3-year renewal in Lafourche Parish. So according to the maximum charter renewal terms, it says that letter grade of a F, the maximum term is 3 years. So what I see in front of me when I look at the Max Charter School in Lafourche Parish, recommendation is renewal, and the renewal term is 3 years. So is that an F school?
Ms. Hill, what
I
page
guess-
is that on?
The Max Charter
Thank
School
you.
is a
Thank
D
you.
letter grade school.
Okay, so that's the D letter grade school, okay.
Correct.
So then you have Algiers Technology Academy. It's 3 years, because I'm just basing on what they.
Algiers
information-
Technology Academy is also a D. If you look in the backup, there's the letter grade and an annual review for each one of these schools. I'm sorry that we didn't actually put the letter grade on
Yeah, because you guys
separate.
didn't,
Is it-
it was not clear. That's
Is it
the
just
issue. It's not clear for us as board members.
Okay.
So that's why.
I apologize.
First of all, you have our apologies for it not being clear. Just so I can make it clear. The law does not allow us to recommend an F school for renewal if it's not an alternative school.
Okay.
You are receiving no recommendations to renew anything that is an F. The law also says if it's not an F, we have to recommend a renewal. So you're receiving just recommendations that meet the terms of the law. Now, there are 3 schools that are up for extension that have an F. That's why I thought, Ms. Hill, you were referring earlier to schools that have an extension, and we're happy to have those conversations too. But there is no recommendation to approve an F school.
So just to have clarification, Mr., what's your name, sir?
Patrick Walsh.
Okay, Mr. Walsh, just to have, so all of the schools that are on the list that are Type 5 charter, that have a 3-year renewal, are all D schools?
Correct.
Which is the requirement under the law.
Yes.
So, Mr. Chairman, just
Ms. Orange-Jones.
just to clarify then, so on page 18 where it says 3 years, it's just a misprint.
It says 3 years for Fs?
Yes.
No, that is the law.
That's
But
the maximum.
that's the maximum under the law, but it is not happening today. There are no F schools under the law, coming to you today for a recommended renewal.
It's just that because it says F and D and they're both 3 years, that's where the misunderstanding came from. Okay, thank you.
And I appreciate Ms. Hill bringing it up because it is confusing looking at it, and I don't mind the clarification at all. I appreciate the department clarifying.
I think that the confusion may result from the growth from the pre-AI. A school could be renewed, and this is not the case for any of the schools that we're bringing to you today, but if a school grows from their pre-assessment index, which is given to them in their second year, a certain number of points over the life of their charter term, they may be eligible for renewal if they're an F. That is not the case with any of the schools that we have today.
That is not happening today.
Okay, and so in regards to, now can we go to the next one, would be the extension. So could you clarify that for me?
And probationary
Yeah,
extension.
yeah, probationary.
So
extension.
let me, Patrick, if I could just take a crack at it, and you can weigh in with what I'm missing. Extensions it's like a 3-year checkpoint. So before it comes up for renewal, which is your decision as to whether or not to end their contract or keep their contract, there's a checkpoint. That checkpoint, we come to you and we say, based on the evidence, we believe we should keep this school going for another year until their contract is up, and then you can decide whether or not to renew their contract. A probationary extension, which is what we're recommending, I believe, on the 3 schools, Ms. Hill, that you're focused on, is where we say, we have good reason to continue this school, but we're doing so letting them know that they're under our watch and that they need to take steps to improve their performance or else they will not get renewed next year.
So the ones that we're giving extension to is only for a year?
An extension is only for a
It's
year.
only
It's
for a year.
just a checkpoint
Okay.
for 1 year. Yes.
And the probationary extension is for a year, but they'll be under watch?
Correct.
Okay. I think maybe in the near future, you guys should have some clarity in here, so before we come, we don't have to go through this, okay?
You have my apologies.
But this, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Beebe.
This still does not satisfy my concerns, and that, once again, we have failing schools, but yet the recommendation is to give an
Well,
extension.
that's why I suggested we pull these schools and talk about it. I thought that was Ms. Hill's original motion. I'm happy to let's talk about
Let's
it.
do that. We can
Yeah.
do that. Let's do that.
Perhaps in the future, just to make it easier on these, a chart, if their letter grade can be just placed. I know it's in the backup material, but just a simple column with a letter grade next to it would make it easier to follow.
We'll do that next time.
Okay. Ms. Hill, do you still have questions about some of these schools?
Well, yes, one of my concerns would be on page 17, the Lycée Francais, Orleans Parish probationary extension. I received numerous, I don't know if other board members have, but emails in regards to Lycée Francais. I know this has been a school that has been struggling for maybe the past 2 years, even since I've been engaged in the process of going to visit the school, listening to some community members, and with the board change in leadership. So my question would be, and even with their finances, with the probationary extension, what are we looking for and what we'll be watching for in regards to this school?
Lycée Francais is receiving a probationary extension solely for their dialogue status. Bulletin 126 requires that any school that receives a financial risk assessment of dialogue receives a probationary extension. So the department will be looking at that school's finances through their quarterly financial review process and the AFR process to make sure that that school receives a monitor or a no action rating on their financial risk assessment for next year.
But this has been an ongoing occurrence at Lycée Francais. Am I correct? Hasn't it had this concern prior to?
I believe it's difficult for any school that's just starting out with a K-1 to grow their finances and to actually become a solid financial school. And so that school over time will hopefully grow their fund balance and commit to or scoring higher on this financial risk assessment. That school has representatives here today to talk about their finances if you have additional questions.
Ms. Hill, would you like to go to the next school?
We go to the next school.
What is the next one?
Joseph S. Clark Preparatory High School.
So let's talk about Clark for a second. Clark, you'll recall, those of you who are on the board, in 2011 was the first time in New Orleans that we had done, since Katrina, a whole school takeover of a high school, where you have literally, there's no change in the grade levels, there's no change in the kids. One new board takes over the entirety of the management of the high school with the same kids, the same grade levels, same building, and so on. At that time, Clark was the lowest performing high school in the state of Louisiana. It has improved. It is not improved at a pace that gets it right now above the threshold to be renewed. We have told the management organization that it's going to have to if it's going to get renewed. That's the law. At the same time, when you think about the high school accountability, remember this. The graduates that you have, those kids were already in the school when this organization took over the management of Clark. High school accountability is very slow to change because the kids who create your high school accountability are mainly your seniors. And those kids were probably just freshmen, sophomores when you took over the management of the school, but you're getting a grade for them. So we think giving them another year is the right thing to do. It's an important mission. But they also know that they need to improve their performance in turning around what was the lowest achieving high school in the state. And we believe that they can get there. If they can't, then next year you'll make that decision, and we'll have to make a change.
Okay. And the other two would be Renew 1 and 2.
Yeah.
They're on probationary extension as well.
These two schools, you'll recall, 9 months ago or so, Patrick, they approved the
March 2014.
So
Sir.
yeah, so 9 months ago, BESE approved an alternate framework for how alternative charter schools should be authorized, and that looks at a number of factors. These are alternative schools. Like many standalone alternative schools across the state, they have a low school performance score, in great part, of course, because they're schools that take in students who have been expelled or have been out of the system for a long period of time. We're recommending that they be extended. For their renewal, we will apply the framework that you approved last year for district schools and for charter schools. And this charter school framework will be used, and we can make a renewal decision based on that.
Okay. And finally, I would just like to say that just how you just articulated to us, you know, each school and what their struggles are and what they need to be areas they need improvement and how you guys are going to work diligently with them. I would like that to be seen across the board. I don't think, for me, I'm speaking for Carolyn, I'm not against charter, scholarship, or traditional school, but what I am against are policies that are not equitable across the board. And so we look at the traditional setting, if a school is under academically unacceptable, you know, we're ready to take that school over, which I think we need to have, just like the dialogue we're having, have those dialogues with those districts, even with the scholarship program. If a school doesn't meet the benchmarks, but they have showed growth, instead of not giving them enrollment, work with them. And just like we work with the charter managing groups, I think we need to do that across the board. And that has always been my concern, because it's not equitable across the board as a board member for me. So that's it. That's all I needed to know. Thank you.
And Mr.
Ms. Beebe?
Okay, thank you. And then again, one of these schools identified a school performance score of 16.4.
Which school are you referring to?
The Renew Accelerate. It's an alternative school, but still, it's of concern. And then, as Ms. Hill articulated, I think we're inconsistent as a state board as it relates to all schools, whether traditional, charters, vouchers, parochial, what have you. And, you know, and I've heard it so often, you know, we don't want students in failing schools. And this, you know, when someone looks, as a parent, I don't care if my child is in an alternative setting, a 16.4?
Dr. Beebe, I think you are right that that's low. At the same time, my dialogues with superintendents, your colleagues around the state, would indicate that we have similar struggles in alternative schools across our state, and we have plenty of SPSs that are in that range. I'm not happy about that, but when you're talking about kids who are coming back from outside the system, kids who are coming oftentimes back from juvenile justice and other settings like that, we're going to have to apply an alternate framework, and that's why you supported an alternate framework before, and that's what we will apply during the renewal process.
And for clarification, the alternate framework will be applied to regular public schools the same way it's applied to charter schools?
It will be applied for informational purposes. There is no authorization decision, so there is no authorization framework, but we are for informational purposes, yes.
Evaluation purposes. Yes. Okay. Ms. Hill, do you have any other schools?
No, I think.
Okay.
And this is another one. Is that an
I'm not sure we really tracked which schools it was that you were trying to pull. Do you no longer need to pull the schools?
After he explained in detail what we were looking at, it gave me a clear understanding of how we're moving forward with these charter schools.
Okay, so is it fair to say that your motion is no
you don't
longer
have to.
needed in your opinion? Okay, can we get, just to dispense with it, do we have any objections to voting down that motion? We have no objections to voting down that motion. Okay, then we go back to the original motion minus the two schools that were handled, though.
And I do have a surprise.
I figured you would. Reserve the right.
I need a motion to reconsider Ms. Bradford's motion. There's some specific language that needs to be in that motion that we didn't make regarding the MLK school. So if we can have a motion to reconsider, I will suggest that language. I think that motion needs a second.
Okay, we have a motion by Ms. Romer, second by Ms. Bradford. Do we have any objections to reconsidering?
And it's just to clarify, to be a little bit more specific in the language.
Okay, hearing no objections, motion carries. Let's reconsider.
Regarding the MLK school, the School Innovation Turnaround Committee recommends that the addendum regarding enrollment policies and procedures be included in the current and renewal charter contracts for MLK Junior Charter School, operated by the Friends of King School, to be signed by the BESE president and charter organization no later than the January 2015 BESE meeting. That's the motion. If I can have a second, I'll explain quickly.
Second.
This is simply, again, Superintendent Dobar mentioned that they're trying to work with MLK on their enrollment policies, and they want to make sure those policies are placed within the contract, so it's clearly understood. And what this is doing is saying that needs to be, if they expect to be renewed, that needs to be done by the January 2015 board meeting for us to consider. That's all that's doing. Just being a little bit more specific.
BESE staff, did y'all capture that change? Okay. Do we have any questions from BESE members? Ms. Hill?
Superintendent White, I would like to make a recommendation with the schools that are on extension or probationary extension. I know you guys are going to be working with them with the framework. When they're up for renewal, can those documentations be attached to their renewal to see their progress and how they're moving forward, so we can make an informed decision on how we would like to vote?
Yes.
Okay, so I'd like to add that to the motion.
That's really separate.
But that doesn't really conflict with the motion that's on the floor. Can you save that motion for after we dispense with this motion?
Okay.
Okay. We have motion by Mr. Romer. Do we have any more questions on that motion? Do we have any objections to the motion? Okay, that motion carries. Ms. Hill, you'd like to make a motion?
The motion is that the schools that are up for extension or probationary extension, when it's time for them to be renewed, can we have that framework and their progress in regards to tracking them of how they're succeeding within that framework presented to the board with the school information so we can make an informed decision as board members?
Before we get a second to that motion, let me ask Superintendent, can you handle that just as a request?
We can handle it as a request. I would say we included 120 pages of backup this time. So what I will commit to doing, and Bridget, you and Aaron and I can work on this, if we could circle back with Ms. Hill and understand where our backup didn't get it right in terms of clearly portraying the information, I'm certainly more than willing to do that.
Okay. Would that satisfy?
Well, that's satisfied, but I'm just saying for the renewal, because I know you guys are going to work with the schools, correct, Superintendent White?
We are.
I mean, for those schools that are up for extension, you guys are going to work with them with a framework. So I just want to know what would be the framework and how the school is progressing moving forward. That's what I'm requesting.
We will provide an update based on the framework in terms of how schools are progressing when these schools are up for a renewal.
Okay.
Okay. With that issue satisfied, let's go back to the original motion. Taking into consideration that we've already handled 2 of these schools with Mr. Romer's motions, so the remaining schools minus those 2, can we get a motion to approve the department's recommendations on those? Ms. Jones, second by Ms. Bradford. Do we have any questions from BESE members on this motion? Hearing none, do we have any objections to the motion? Hearing none, that motion carries, unless we have speakers. Okay. Mr. Colonel Davis.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Colonel William Davis, Commandant, New Orleans Military Maritime Academy. Thank you for your time. I guess we're already moving forward, but appreciate the minute just to say a couple words about where we've been. It's a pleasure here to be for extension. It's hard to believe it's been 3 years since I talked to you last, or the first time. We started with grade 9 only of 120 cadets. Happy to report that today we have 540 cadets on deck in grades 9 through 12. And I think when you look at the data that's in your package, we're doing the job that you tasked us with. The mission education executes every day, and it's not just educating academically, but it's also the character development that many of our young men and women need. We take that mission very seriously. I think across the board, when you look at the data, there's one anomaly. We'll discuss that in a later session. But across the board, all of our metrics are pointed in the right, or all of our performance in our metrics are pointed in the right direction. We recruit our cadets far and wide across the area, as in keeping with our Type 2 charter, and we recruit our teachers from those same places. Based on the discussion earlier, I just want to let you know we do understand we are in the people business, and we worry about those cadets, their parents, and our staff every day, and hopefully train and educate them the way they need to be. But we also do understand it is a business, and that's why there's important issues that are also contained within our SPS score that show that we're taking care of that end of the mission as well. I would say that across the board, our EOC scores, if you look from last year to this year, about almost a 20% improvement. From basic improvement, we're in the top 2%, and for Master and Above in the top 1% in terms of changing students' trajectories in their education. We also completed our new facility over the last 2 years, in less than 3 years. From my first meeting with our group of people that helped design and build the construction, we moved into our campus last December about this time. With the help of parents, students, staff, and other workers, we moved in over Christmas break and started up operations on our new campus last January. We have effectively built a STEM program partnering with the Louisiana Economic Development Cyber Innovation Center that grew it from a 2-year program to a 4-year program with our help teaming with them. And we have been reaching out to industry colleges, the Department of Education, to develop our maritime program in keeping with our charter and the name of our academy. And hopefully here soon we'll have good news on the Jumpstart side as we develop that maritime program working with the Department of Education. We'll continue to improve and build our programs. We don't plan on looking back. We'll do whatever we can to succeed and change the trajectory of these young men and women's lives. I appreciate and hopefully look forward to your consideration of our extension, although I think we've moved through this phase. And I really do look forward, on behalf of the parents and the cadets and the staff, to meeting you for a renewal next year to the most we can get. Thank you very much for your time. I look forward to talking to you at some other time in the future.
Thank you, Colonel Davis. Yes, Mr.
Sorry,
Roman?
subject to any questions.
I want to thank you for your effort, and I know there was an issue that your school had an anomaly, unusual anomaly that affected your grade. You received a passing grade, I think a C for your school, but without this anomaly, it probably would have been higher, or certainly would have been higher. And you brought that issue for us to consider, and I know the superintendent is looking at it as well, and will probably come forward with some recommended changes in the future that applies not only to your school but other schools that might be in the same situation. So I appreciate the work you're doing, and you bringing to our attention that issue, and hopefully we'll address it for all schools moving forward.
Look forward to it, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Colonel Davis.
Thanks.
Okay, Ms. Lee Barrios. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Superintendent?
May I just make one comment before we move on from this item, members? I do want you to know that as I look out in the audience, I see a large number of our charter school heads here today. And from Colonel Davis, who represents the military, I see Pastor Southall. Welcome, Pastor. From New Orleans, I see Superintendent Stan Smith from the New Orleans Parish School Board. Rhonda Alloise, Ben Kleben. We have representatives from a number of schools and organizations. I see International represented, Sean, and others, and there's many out there. I just want you to know that I know that charter schools is a contentious issue. It's very political and all that at our board. But these people represent the best of our education system, and they're doing fantastic work. And I wanted to thank all of them for coming here today. Many of them didn't speak, but they heard their schools spoken about, and they do fantastic work, and I want to thank all of them.
Duly noted. Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Let's do this again. Do we have any objections to the motion? Hearing none, that motion carries. Next item.
That concludes the agenda.
Thank you.
The next meeting is scheduled to start for 12:30. We will start at 12 since we are permitted to begin 30 minutes early.